This week on MS Refresh, the Power Platform Showcase for August. Do you know where your apps are? Plus, Power BI, data in space, whatever the hell that means. All that and more. Subscribe to stay in the know. This is the MS Refresh Show. Hi there, and welcome to the Matt and Sean 365 Refresh Show. This is episode 70 for the work week of August 29th, 2022, and this month's Power Platform Showcase. Coming to you from the East Coast, my name is Matt Wade.
And coming to you from the West Coast with windswept hair, I'm Sean Bugler.
I just assume you were out, you're definitely a marina, sailing guy. You probably have that, ahoy polloi membership going on in the Bay Area. Is that your typical lunch? That's what you do for lunch on your typical
yeah. I mean, that's my I go out for a little bit of a walk, and then I jump onto my yacht and I just bandy about the bay.
As one does.
Now, as you know, we've talked about it behind the scenes a little bit. I am in training for a 200-mile relay that we're pre-recording this episode. It is at the end of this week, and I am just as unkempt as all get out because I can't think about anything other than how much my legs hurt.
So as many people may not be able to realize or may not think it's very obvious. So I too run on occasion. In fact, you see some 10K medals behind me back there, and I can absolutely relate to. Now, granted, that is not the number that you're looking at, but yeah, that's the numbers do mean something to me in my head and in my heart, where I'm just like, oh, and feeling for you.
Yeah, I'm not doing this again. It is unlikely that my teammates are watching this episode, but if they happen to be, looking forward to seeing you.
Looking forward to saying goodbye.
Yes, I'm never doing this again. It's amazing how I have not been running the last 2.5 years. It's just not been in the cards just because of school and, myriad of other things.
Yep.
And I just thought I could just jump back into that because that's always, again, like you know me, there's no time like the last minute in the world of Sean Bugler. Unfortunately, my age belies some things that have changed over time, up to and including my knees just not liking impact in the way that they used to.
Yeah, not fair.
No. So looking forward to getting that over with. But that's where my hair is at. I'm not cutting it until after the relay. That way, we've got a ton of exciting stuff. We haven't gotten to do a Power Platform Showcase in at least another couple months. So I'm excited to get back into it. Are you ready to talk about the news?
I absolutely am. Let's do it.
This is the news.
As we approach the end of the Power Platform's 2022 Wave 1 release plan, we continue to see the various services evolve in interesting but not necessarily surprising ways. Here's what's new for the month of August, starting with Power Apps. The Modern Form Designer is scheduled to hit general availability this month. With the milestone, according to the Power Apps team, Modern Forms will finally reach feature parity with the classic form experience. Capabilities such as related record filtering, logic enabled through business rules, and more will be available to makers without having to revert to the classic experience, which for those of us who operate in the SharePoint universe know is a painful and disruptive experience. If you haven't started familiarizing yourself with the Modern Form Designer in Power Apps, now is probably a good time. Microsoft has been fairly transparent about their plans to eventually retire the classic Form Designer. Express Design is also rolling out a capability we've previously reported on that allows makers to take a picture of an app design or link to a Figma file to generate a new app. That's going to hit public preview in late May. In anticipation of the general availability rollout, a new overview video of the image to app function specifically has been uploaded to YouTube. Now, there's no earth-shattering reveals here, but particularly for those who want to see what the flow is actually going to look and feel like, it's a welcome peek behind the curtain. We'll drop a link to the show notes below. Power Pages, the successor to the Power Apps portals, isn't seeing a ton of public action just yet, though undoubtedly the team is hard at work behind the scenes preparing the service to hit general availability later this year. In September is the hope. However, Power Apps portals continues to see iterative development on the core platform. Notably, support for Dataverse file columns hit public preview just last month, and support for image columns is now generally available. These have been massive asks for makers working in the space and come as welcome enhancements for those looking for more robust form capabilities and portals, as well as the eventual Power Pages service. Taking our talents over to the Power Automate side of things, Power Automate is firing on all cylinders in the run up to the end of Wave 1, again in September. Hitting general availability this month, the Dataverse connector now supports authentication through users-specific accounts when triggering flows. Previously, makers that wanted to deploy flows with the Dataverse connector had to either embed their own authentication as a stored connection or make use of a shared use accounts authentication, something that Microsoft has been less than enthused about over time. This change is specific to manual triggers, such as those directly in the Power Automate console or via the Power Apps v2 trigger, and should help facilitate more secure, scalable flows that touch Dataverse. Also supposedly hitting general availability this month, makers will be able to see a more detailed information overview about flow triggers directly on the flow runs page. Now, this is going to be a huge bump for troubleshooting. It's going to mark an improvement over the current process, which involves opening up individual runs and expanding the trigger box. Now, I'm not seeing it in my tenant just yet, which, as we're recording it, is just a couple of days from the end of the month. But hopefully, they're just targeting a dramatic down-to-the-wire finish, as always. Lastly, for Power Automate, Process Insights, a feature that allows makers to analyze their flow runs to identify opportunities for enhancements and optimizations, has been in public preview since May. In preparation for general availability, the team has uploaded an overview video showcasing how it works and how best to interpret the various insights that it surfaces. We'll drop a link to that video as well in the show notes. Bringing it on home with Power BI, here's what's new this month. Arriving in public preview, Power BI is rolling out the ability to include Power BI reports and datasets directly in Power Apps. Despite being a part of the alleged happy Power Platform family, these two services haven't always played nicely together, and it's been frustrating for us as makers. So this is a welcome enhancement. App makers will be able to add reports and datasets to a solution, connect Power BI parameters to Power Apps environment variables, embed Power BI reports in model-driven apps, and use Power BI components. And there's allegedly more to come. We're looking forward to seeing it. Lastly, the honor of most interesting update goes to what the Power BI team is calling Data in Space. Hitting public preview just last month, Data in Space is a feature specific to the Power BI mobile app that uses augmented reality, or AR, to attach Power BI reports to real-world locations. Simply hold up your camera on a mobile device using the Power BI mobile app to see and interact with reports that are affixed to specific anchors in space. It's like Minority Report for data nerds. We've dropped a link to the documentation in the show notes if you'd like to learn more. And that's the news.
That was the news.
Very nicely done, Sean. A couple of things in there were kind of interesting to me. Again, I know I always have to propagandize the team stuff onto you. This is your opportunity to push back on me with the Power Platform stuff, which I do have some interest in, not as much as you, definitely. So I'm very curious to hear what stood out to you for this session.
Yeah, I think that there's always interesting stuff that's happening in the world of the Power Platform. And unlike the rest of Microsoft 365, where it can be a little bit of a surprise what's rolling out, the Power Platform is actually really proactive in publicizing what their roadmap is. So as we've talked about in months past, the way that they operate is they have a wave release plan that they announce months in advance that indicates where they're running from, either March to October or I'm sorry, March to September or October back to March. And it's a really great way to see kind of what's coming, what they're anticipating developing. And I really appreciate that because there's no surprises in terms of what the functionality is necessarily. Obviously, they keep a few things behind closed doors, like Power Pages didn't exactly get pre-announced months in advance, although I guess you could argue that the whole public preview thing is kind of that. But yeah, it's a little bit more polished than the rest of the Microsoft 365 universe. And I would almost hope that other parts of the Microsoft 365 unit are paying attention to this kind of transparency because it's refreshing to say the least. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about here is a bit of functionality that didn't get a ton of play when the Wave 1 plan was announced. but now that we're starting to get a little bit more information in the documentation, I'm fascinated by. So they're calling this feature data in space. Now, I will tell you, I am the least likely party when it comes to being excited about something happening in the world of Power BI. Like, that's not my bag, despite having millions of YouTube views under my belt in the world of Excel. Power BI, I just never bridged that gap.
And what's funny there is that I am the least interested in anything to deal with AR being shoehorned into a place just for the sake of AR. So put us together and we are going to hate this feature, it sounds like.
I'm genuinely interested to see how this ends up getting applied in a business sense, because it definitely does seem very field oriented, like being out in the field and being able to see like an oil rig and point your camera at it. So let me show you what's going on here. So this is the data in space. I'm sorry, I did that wrong.
Data in space.
Good work.
Documentation. Thank you. It kind of goes over what the feature
preview.
That's my mistake. Parentheses.
Yeah, okay.
So it kind of gives an overview of what the functionality is here. Now, one of the things that we'll, of course, highlight right out of the gate is that it only supports the fruit. And this is, of course, because one, it's consistent hardware, and two, Apple has been pushing the envelope with respect to AR. Of course, there's much to do about what they're going to do in the AR VR space in the long term. But we're seeing a lot of that in just the mobile OS to start. So here's what mobile and what data in space is all about. You can kind of see a visual of it right here. The idea is that you can use Azure anchors, Azure space anchors, to mark a geographic location in space and say, I want this to be associated with a particular Power BI report. And so you can see here, like pulling the phone out and being able to hold it up to specific areas, you can actually see the reports hovering in those respective areas, presumably related to those particular areas. Now, what would this look like in practice? I was surprised to see them highlight a facility management scenario, because again, this strikes me as something that would be useful for people out in the field. You're looking at a power plant. You've gone to a specific power plant and you want to learn more about, how many, I don't know, kilowatts, megawatts.
I'm thinking more like, I guess you could do it that way, which is more of an interesting kind of tidbit. This is when we get into, with my clients and folks I've worked with for dashboards and stuff, sometimes there's data points that are interesting and then there's data points that are necessary. I could totally see like an inventory management situation where, like, I don't know, the back of a grocery store, right, has pallets and pallets of stuff that have to be moved out. And if you hold up your phone to a pallet of items, that inventory asset management tool knows how much stuff is back there, that you just hold it up and it's like, oh, that's 200 items there. I only need to take 100, so I'm going to move the 100. Like, that's actionable numbers. And then, like, you tell it, by the way, I just moved 50 of these things and they're now back on the shelves, or there's a scanning process when you take them out. I could see that being a very useful case. I don't know what facilities is going to do with this, but anyway.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm thinking as well. Although you could make the argument of, seeing like conference rooms down a hallway and knowing which ones are potentially, obviously this is not Power BI per se, but you can start to see like where AR has like an immediate tangible value to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be really interested to actually get my hands on this, just so I can start to play through those scenarios. Obviously in a hybrid capacity, that's not going to be super useful. But it's not hard to envision that particularly larger organizations with campus-like infrastructure might be able to squeeze some use out of this. So we've dropped a link in the show notes for data in space. And if you are our faithful viewers, have a use case that you think might be useful with respect to Power BI data in space, drop a comment in the show notes. I would love to understand where people are seeing immediate value for this kind of thing.
I mean, this sounds exactly like SharePoint Spaces, which I still roll my eyes at because I still have not.
It's still out there.
Other than John Moore and his introduction to the technology in conference rooms and a new building, when during COVID they couldn't go to the new building, but they were still building the new building during COVID, right?
Right.
Like, that was a really good use case because people couldn't see the building in person and go inside. And then also the technology. Oh, you want to use the speakerphone? Here's information and a way to get. Otherwise, I have not seen a great use case for it, and this to me at first sounded much more like it would be a victim of that, but actually I could think of where numerical data is important from a location-based perspective, and I want to just be able to pull that up and not have to go scrolling through a whole bunch of different dashboards to try to slice and dice to get to the number that I really wanted.
Yeah. And I mean, I think particularly with Microsoft and the whole HoloLens thing, I don't know if you've seen, but there's been reports that the HoloLens is not long for this world from an iterative development standpoint. So it's interesting to see them investing in AR in a more consumer-friendly package, something that everybody's got in their pocket. Because, I don't know about you, but I don't have a HoloLens laying around. Although, Microsoft, if you happen to have one laying around, happy to take it off your hands. I'll develop.
Well, at this point,
with it.
At this point, you might as well just start asking for leftover Google Glass too. Like it's gonna be just as.
Did I ever tell you I got an invite to that? I was in the second wave of explorers invited to that, but I was working at Foot Locker at the time, and that was like a whole paycheck. And I still wish that I had bought it.
Yeah,
just to have it.
I still think that I don't understand why that was the Newton of AR glasses, because I feel like that is the most obvious next step for computing. Is I shouldn't have to sit in front of screens. They should be right in front of my face. And when I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see somebody that I recognize, if they're on my friends list and I forgot their name, it should pop up with, "Hey, that's Jack Johnson that you know. You should say hello." And I'll never have to remember somebody's name or recognize a face ever again, which will be great because I'm the worst at that. What's your name?
It was ahead of its time. Yeah, what's my name? That's why we actually put our names.
That is exactly why, I guess.
It's like, who is this?
Yes.
So that's what I've got. Matt Wade, what jumped out to you? Is there anything interesting?
So I would like to hear a little bit more about the classic versus modern forms that you're talking about in Power Apps, because I think that might actually affect me, and I haven't been paying attention to this kind of stuff. So I'm kind of curious to know what that is and what is the impact on users.
Sure. So I'll tell you right out of the gate that I'm not a self-professed expert in the differentials between the two, but the high level is that Microsoft and the Power Platform specifically has been steadily moving the Power Apps infrastructure over to this more modernized experience here. And that's, improvements in terms of the UI and interactivity and flow lowercase f, so that as the form resizes and things like that, the things are able to scale appropriately. And likewise, they've also been working on this idea of converging the model-driven and the Canvas app experiences into a single kind of overarching app development canvas, so that you can have, a model-driven app that can incorporate, Canvas-like elements and, vice versa. With the idea being here that you've got a single authoring experience for building these low-code, no-code apps. And right now, the difference between the two in terms of what they're capable of, whether it's, I mentioned in the news, this idea of leveraging business rules, that's something that exists in the model-driven side of things. But for people like you and I, who kind of almost exclusively operate on the Canvas side of things, business rules are not something we're familiar with. And so kind of harmonizing what is possible on both sides of the fence is going to be a really important part of the long-term vision of Power Apps, really. So, because I'll tell you, like, I don't willingly step into the model-driven side of things just because it's a little too structured, it's a little too rigid. And it just doesn't
also
play around thing.
You need Dataverse too, right? And you need to pay for Dataverse to use a model-driven app, correct? Right. Yeah. So,
and this, of course, is the part where somebody jumps in and says that you can use Dataverse for Teams, which blah 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 blah. Of course you can.
Right.
One limitations, especially if you're an organization that doesn't leverage Teams like I do. I know it's a ploy that Microsoft is playing just to get more.
But that's a freemium model. They're just trying to get you into
it.
Yeah. Well, in both directions,
right.
They're trying to play into Teams and they're trying to play into Dataverse and make you pay for one of them or both.
They just want you to have a taste.
Gateway drug. Yep. Totally.
Gateway drug. Gateway business drugs.
Yes. Okay. So that's interesting. So in what way that affects me then, it sounds like, because this is one thing that the more I get into Power Apps, which to me is reasonably new. I've been using Power Automate now for years.
Right.
In limited capacity. Like I would do it when it made sense, but I'm not going to go off and try to automate things for the sake of automating them. But with Power Apps, I have been wickedly disappointed by the fact that, okay, this is is built in a web framework. It has a mobile app, and they're moving forward with the whole like publishing an app that's outside of the app, right? So you can actually like just tap not the Power Apps app, but
actually deploy it to like the iOS App Store or the Google Play Store.
Why? Like the fact that I've had to ask a number of people as we're going through this, how do I get a responsive app? And the answer is
Sure.
it doesn't exist. You have to pick tablet or you have to pick phone. And if you want both, you have to link to both. Or you have to create two different ones, first off, that connect to the same data sources and do all the same things, but just have a different layout concept to them. And then you have to make sure that the people have access to the right one in the context that they want it in. And it's like,
So it's not 100% true.
no, okay, correct me on that one.
You can build a responsive app. So there are at least a screen or two of responsive layouts that are available when you're creating a new page in Power Apps. But you have to be incredibly intentional about it. And you have to be able to think through the math of it. There's a lot more math than I think people are willing to step into. So like I've built beautifully responsive apps and I'm really proud of them, but they take an incredible amount of work. This is not something that anybody should expect a typical citizen developer or maker to just jump into. This is something that's taken a ton of understanding how that works. It's taken a ton of understanding and watching videos from, friends, mine and yours,
Totally.
Shane Young. There's a ton of resources out there that will help you build those responsive apps, but they're not easy. They're not intuitive, but it is possible. And separately, I'll show you some of the cool stuff I've built. It is kind of cool, but then you do have to think through the paradigm of, when we get certain breakpoints, like when it's a small screen versus a medium screen, or, when I take my phone and I turn it from portrait to landscape, like what's that experience going to look like? What should be surfaced and things to that effect. It is still ultimately easier to build a separate, portrait app and a separate landscape app for the tablet and the phone experiences. Yeah.
And my frustration there is that, I use Webflow for building a couple websites, and
interesting.
It's a really easy to use. They say it's a no code platform. That's not true, but it's definitely a low code platform for building websites. You don't have to know CSS. You don't have to know HTML. You don't have to, really code anything, as long as you can do the drag and drops and whatnot. I really wish SharePoint would move in the direction of how Webflow works in general, just because I think their database management and display of content is so much better than what SharePoint has.
Sure.
But one thing that they do extremely well is the responsiveness, and that includes forms. So you can put, form fields or whatever, and a submit button, and connect to MailChimp, or send in an email or whatever. And it's clearly not that hard. Like, it can be done, and it kind of blows my mind some of the things that were sort of, I don't want to say overlooked, but to your point, where do you paginate, right, for a long form? Well, if you're on an iPhone, you don't need pagination. You just need to group your questions, because you can just scroll continuously. But most people don't want to see a continuous scrolling experience on desktop. They want to see the pagination. And there should be a way for that to be able to be like, end page here, and know that on tablet it's a page, or it goes to a different screen in Power Apps, and then on the phone version, just keep scrolling. Just put a little line break or something in the middle that makes it clear, which I realize isn't going to answer everybody's questions or respond to every complaint out there, but I feel like it's going to fill a lot of the needs. But okay, that's good. Thank you for schooling me on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure that, for anybody that's got questions on, responsiveness and Power Apps, happy to answer any questions that I've got and point you in the direction of where I was able to find help. But it is possible.
Cool. All right. Any other things that stood out to you before we finish for today's episode?
No, I think I'm excited to see us wrapping up Wave 1 and stepping into Wave 2, which kicks off in October. So that's going to be everything that Microsoft is talking about developing and rolling out between October and, I want to say, February or March of next year. That's already been published. So we already know to some degree what's going to be in Wave 2. And it's really exciting to see the kind of the coalescing of all these different pillars into a little bit more of a harmonious ecosystem versus, Power BI, for example, always seemed kind of like an outlier in the greater scheme of things, but we're starting to see that incorporated a little bit more so too with, Power Apps and Power Automate. So looking forward to seeing more of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about Wave 2 in our next Power Platform Showcase. Perfect.
All right. Well, I think that just about does it. Thanks so much for watching. As always, a like and subscribe is much appreciated. Leave a comment below to start that discussion. Sean, thanks so much for joining me this week. And we're going to take a bit of a break. So hopefully you had fun with us this summer. We'll have a separate video out with a little bit more information about what to expect there. But we will see you again very soon in the autumn. And thank you so much for watching, and take care.